Welcome to Kendall and Cooper Talk Mysteries. I'm Julie Cooper, a mystery writer and half of the duo bringing you this regular podcast series focused, you guessed it, on mystery, suspense, and thriller fiction. Wendy's very anxious to welcome our special guests. Yes, we're graced with two of them this time, but first, quick thanks to my brother, Chris Squires, for his original composition and performance of our theme song, The Man in the Panama Hat. And now, Wendy, who are you introducing?
Well, we've got two guests today, as you said, and I'm very excited about them. Little bit more on them in a minute, because first I want to tell you something that I've been learning about. What I've learned is that what really engages a reader in a story is the emotion that the author skillfully shows through the thoughts, actions, and reactions of the characters. The reader's empathy connects them with the characters and with the plot. If an author just tells the reader about feelings, that's not as effective as when they write in a way that shows the emotions to the reader. Then the reader is also experiencing the scene. Many writers, like me, are advised to show, don't tell, in our writing. And we all know this intellectually. But sometimes you have this shown to you, and that really turns on the light bulb. For example, in my rewriting group, one of the writers, Carl Lee, read an amazing passage he wrote that really got me worked up, I mean for a week, with the way that it successfully showed emotion without telling me the emotion. Here's an excerpt. He turned the TV set off and slammed the remote on the coffee table before hurling himself up from the sofa. He paced the confines of his apartment like a caged animal, the walls closed in, the past week's events pressing down on him. Abruptly, he headed into his bedroom. He changed out of last night's work clothes, putting them in the laundry basket, and stepped into the shower. The water scalded, but leached deep into his cold, tired body. He pulled on a pair of shorts, he pulled the shades open and stepped onto the patio. He swiped at some cobwebs just over his head. That's the end of the excerpt that I'm going to share today, and nowhere in there do I ever hear the word, but I know this guy is agitated. If Carl tells the reader that this guy is agitated, the reader thinks, okay, so whatever. But here, as the reader, I felt it. I got agitated too. So after building some suspense, I'm going to tell you that today we're talking with two authors whose emotive and suspenseful writing produces incredibly engaging stories. Lynne and Valerie Constantine are sisters who've just collaborated using the pen name Liv Constantine on a new, mesmerizing psychological thriller, The Last Mrs. Parrish. You may have seen that The Last Mrs. Parrish is the December pick for Reese Witherspoon's Sunshine Book Club. Lynne is also author of the amazing suspense novel, The Veritas Deception, and also several short stories. In her spare time, she's a social media strategist and speaker. Valerie has been a mystery fan from her early days with Nancy Drew and later graduating on to Shakespeare. How wonderful. The sisters co-authored also Circle Dance, a taut Greek-American family drama page-turner. Discover this sisterly mystery duo with us. Welcome, Lynne and Valerie.
Thank you, Wendy. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Just a pleasure to be talking with you today.
And I'm going to jump right into some questions because I know we have lots to put into this particular episode. Your character, Amber, who's certainly a protagonist in the book, has been described by one reviewer as the most unlikable one yet. And apparently, we just keep right on reading. What's the most fascinating thing about this character for both of you as her creators?
I think one of the things that's fascinating, both to write and to read about, is somebody who really has no conscience. we're not only fascinated by it, but we are repulsed by it at the same time. So there's that urge to just keep reading with sort of astonishment. Lynn, what do you think?
Well, I agree. And I also think that it's Amber's ability to rationalize her bad behavior to herself. So she really does convince herself quite easily that in whatever dastardly scheme she's involved, that she's really the victim. And she has an amazing way of taking even the worst thing and justifying it to herself. And and if it wasn't so awful, I guess it would be amusing.
Great, great. Well, that makes sense, and that certainly gives that kind of intriguing push-pull that I think most readers experience when they're reading your book. Now, I often speak in mystery writing workshops about how the theme for any successful fiction should come down to one underlying word played out in contrasting forms by many characters. Is The Last Mrs. Parrish all about envy or entitlement, or what word would each of you choose?
Well, I would say envy, because it's very much a story about coveting. And when we start out in Amber's perspective, she is taking everything in, and she's wanting Daphne's life. She's wanting everything that Daphne has, and she is really overcome with jealousy and with envy. And the book tells it's a bit of a moral on, what happens when you do covet someone else's, whether it's their life or their things, and how things are not always what they seem. And, perspective makes a big difference in reality.
Sure. Great. Now, I admit I'm completely challenged by your character, Amber. You've just referred to the fact that she basically has no moral compass. And in fact, I've got to say, I once worked with someone who could probably give her a few lessons, sadly. Is there anything that's good about your character, Amber?
Well, there really isn't much that's good about her. I probably the most I can say in the good column is that she's smart and she's very hardworking. She's very focused and she goes after what she wants. But she's really just not a nice woman. I'm sorry.
So she's
she's
resourceful, but she's evil.
Yeah, she's definitely not somebody you would want to let into your life, but she can appear to be very sweet.
Okay. Okay. Now, I know you have family members of Greek descent, and certainly the ancient Greeks were some of our best storytellers and dramatists. Circle Dance is your tale of a Greek-American family drama, and it's one book we don't know much about. Could you enlighten us?
Sure. So Circle Dance was a labor of love for us many years ago. It was the first book that we wrote, and as they say, a lot of times your first book has a lot of you in it. So it's a story of sisterhood, family, roots, and it really is about these two sisters who are trying to assimilate. I mean, they're born here, but their family and their grandparents they're very close to. So there are a lot of the Greek traditions that have been handed down to them, and what they're trying to do is really find their way between the culture, the modern culture here, and what they've been given by their family, 2 and 3 generations back. So it really talks about your ties to your heritage and traditions. And even though it is a Greek story, I mean, I think it really translates to any nationality. So it's at its core, it's about family and loyalty and tradition and how family can help you through trying times in your life.
Sounds great. Now, is there any chance one of your future suspense protagonists will be Greek so they can bring more aspects of that very rich culture into genre fiction?
Well, as a matter of fact, the answer is yes. We actually have some Greek characters that we have hiding in a drawer.
Oh, good.
Right? And we've talked about pulling them out again. And we'd like to not only do that, but to set part of the story in Greece. So we're definitely working on that. That's a work in progress.
Oh, I'd love that. We'll anxiously await that effort. And I'm wondering if Lynne Valerie, you would do us the honor of giving us a reading from The Last Mrs. Parrish.
With pleasure. Amber sensed danger, not in the words Meredith had spoken, but from something in her manner. Maybe she was just imagining it. She put her empty coffee cup back on the sideboard and walked through the French doors that seemed to invite her onto the deck. Outside, she stood looking at the vast expanse of Long Island Sound. In the distance, she spotted a sailboat, its sails billowing in the wind, a magnificent spectacle. She walked to the other end of the deck, where she had a better view of the sandy beach below. When she turned to go back inside, she heard Meredith's unmistakable voice coming from the conservatory. "Honestly, Daphne, how well do you know this girl? You met her at the gym. Do you know anything about her background?" Amber stood silently at the edge of the door. "Meredith, really, all I needed to know was that her sister died of CF. What more do you want? She has a vested interest in raising money for the foundation." "Have you checked her out?" Meredith asked, her tone still skeptical. "You know, her family, education, all those things." "This is volunteer work, not a Supreme Court nomination. I want her on the committee. You'll see, she'll be a wonderful asset." Amber could hear the irritation in Daphne's voice. "All right, it's your committee. I won't bring it up again." Amber could hear footsteps on the tile floor as they left the room, and she stepped in and quickly pushed her portfolio under a pillow on the sofa so that it would look like she'd forgotten it. In it were her notes from the meeting and a photograph tucked into one of the pockets. The lack of any other identifying information would ensure that Daphne would have to root around to find the photo. Amber was 13 in the picture. That had been a good day, one of the few her mother had been able to leave the cleaners and take them to the park. She was pushing her little sister on the swings. On the back, Amber had written, "Amber and Charlene," even though it was a picture of her with her sister Trudy. Meredith was going to be tricky. She'd said she was looking forward to getting to know Amber better. Well, Amber was going to make sure she knew as little as possible. She wasn't going to let some society snob screw with her. She'd make sure that the last person who tried that got what was coming to her.
Ooh.
Wow. That's great. I especially love the lurking and listening, if in the background.
Yeah, yes.
That's
Does
so,
a lot of that.
yeah, it's so revealing with that character. I love that passage. Thank you so much.
You're
Well,
welcome.
two people can react completely differently to the same situation. A negative circumstance that one personality can shrug off and move on can cause another to collapse in despair, could cause another one to seek revenge, and so on. How do you get to know your characters so well that you know the way they would react to the action around them? And do your characters ever surprise you?
Yes. We actually get to know our characters better as the writing goes on, and inevitably the first few chapters are rewritten when the book, when we're at the end of the first draft, excuse me. So what happens is that there's a lot of rewriting that occurs, and a character may react in a certain way or take a certain course of action that as we have gotten to know them better, we decide it doesn't really make sense anymore, and we will go back and change that. So we always are driven and led by who the characters are and who they've become by the end of that first draft, and the action has to line up with that. And so we just know as we're writing and getting to know them that there may be something that we thought was a great plot twist or a great avenue for them to take, and we'll have to go back and discuss it, and we'll say, I really don't think she would have reacted this way. I don't think she would have said that. And then we just make the changes. And the characters really are constantly surprising us. There's always something new. And as Valerie and I write, our process is to write individually and then share chapters and then discuss them every day. And so oftentimes I will receive a chapter from Valerie, and the character will have a completely new thing that has happened to him or her in the past, or a new character may just appear that we haven't discussed, and and vice versa. And that, I think, that really helps to keep the writing organic and keep the process fresh for us.
Mm-hmm.
That really sounds like a great way to amp up the creativity too. I love that. Since two people can have different reactions, as co-authors, how do you resolve those differences of opinion on characters or story?
Well, you're really right there. That absolutely there are different reactions, and so we try really hard to be open-minded to each other's ideas and opinions, to let go of our preconceived or what we feel is, oh, this is the right direction. We knew right out of the gate that we needed to park our egos at the door and just do what's best for the story. And so the question that we always ask each other and ourselves as we're discussing this is, what would the character do or say in this situation? What is the best way to move in terms of the story itself? And we discuss that. We listen to each other's ideas and criticism, again, with an open mind. And I would say, and wouldn't you, Lynn, that every time we resolve any differences of opinion this way?
Yes. I mean, we're both tactful, and so there's no attacking or negativity. And, sometimes an idea may not sound like the right way to go, and one of us will not agree with it. But then as the discussion continues, we'll come around to the other's way of thinking. So I think we even surprise ourselves at times when, we think we have a really solid position. But Valerie's right. I mean, we've just reached the point in our writing where we care more about the writing, and I think you have to, than your ego. I mean, not only with writing with a co-writer, but also once you're in the editing process, it only hurts the finished product if you can't put your ego aside and really look at what's best for the work.
Oh, that's beautiful advice.
Thank you.
In weheartwriting.com, I love that, you wrote about writing a three-dimensional villain. And at one point, you talk about Amber in The Last Mrs. Parrish, and that she sees herself as the hero of her own story. Can you talk a little about that and about what makes a memorable villain?
Sure. So I think in order for a villain to not be cardboard cutout of just all bad, they have to have a lot of nuance. And so with Amber, first of all, we really tried to come to an understanding of what her background was. And even though we think she was probably sort of, not a nice person from the time she was younger, there were factors that influenced that. And so we also had to make sure that in Amber's own mind, and I think this is true for most quote unquote villains, I don't think that they think that they're bad unless they're murderers or something. I think they just feel like they're justified in whatever their actions are. And that's what we tried to do with Amber. So even we really let the reader into her internal monologue, which I think was very important for the story, so that the reader could hear what was going on in her mind. If she was getting rid of, say, a colleague in a work environment, then she would justify that to herself by saying, well, she really is getting old and she needs to retire. And, she's going to have a much better life now that I've pushed her out because she'll be with her grandchildren. So even though to the reader, you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's just ridiculous. That's how she operates. And I think that's how she gets through her day. And she very much is. I mean, she looks at Daphne as not deserving what she has, and Amber, it should be Amber. So she is definitely the hero of her own story. And I think she would argue, if she were here talking to us, that she's done nothing wrong and that she's just the victim once again.
Wow. Having read the book, my only reaction to that is wow. Well, I've really enjoyed your websites and blogs talking about writing craft. Sometimes you reference something from Shakespeare, and I'm also a huge Shakespeare fan. How has your love of Shakespeare influenced your writing?
Well, first of all, I would never be presumptuous enough to compare anything I write to Shakespeare, but I do think that Shakespeare has influenced all of us, and especially all of us who write, but really everyone, whether we realize it or not. He just so enriched the English language. The enrichment was profound. So, for example, if you've ever been in a pickle or waited with bated breath or gone on a wild goose chase, you've been quoting from one of his plays, The Tempest, The Merchant of Venice. I mean, some of his phrases have become cliches.
Nice.
A heart of gold Henry V, The World's My Oyster, The Merry Wives of Windsor. And when we talk about jealousy as the green-eyed monster, we're quoting another great villain, Iago, from Othello. Mm-hmm. So Shakespeare invented something like 1,700 new words, which is just astounding. And who better to study for just incredibly masterful character development? Think of Shylock or Falstaff or Hamlet, Lady Macbeth. These are characters that we never forget. There just has never been a better storyteller.
That's so inspiring. I got to get back to my Shakespeare again. You're so right.
I know, right? Me too.
Do the same thing.
Your books are great page turners. What is it about your writing that makes it so hard for readers to put your books down? And by the way, you've cost me some late nights and sleepy mornings at work.
That's nice to hear.
Good.
Well, we hope that they're page turners. And I think one aspect that really helps with that is the editing process and cutting unnecessary scenes or anything that's filler. So we try, of course, the first draft, everything, you throw everything in there, and then it's in refinement and in editing where we really look, and our editor helps us look at anything that really doesn't move the plot forward, that's not necessary, that's redundant, has to come out. And we try to leave each chapter on some sort of an interesting note so that you want to get to the next chapter.
Well, I definitely did want to get to each chapter right away. Relating a story is one thing. Incorporating plot twists that whirl a reader like me around at full speed is an amazing skill. Do you know the whole plot, including the twists, when you first dream up your story, or do the twists come later?
It's really a combination. We knew the main twist before we even sat down to write. But in terms of the other twists that came along the way, they come later as we write. And as Lynne said before, we allow ourselves to write organically so that we can make changes as we go along. And so those little twists that came here and there really happened as we wrote. But again, the major twist, that we knew before we began.
Oh boy.
It's interesting too, because there are times where we think we have a twist, or we do have a twist, and the more we talk about it, it's still there, but it metamorphosizes into a totally different thing, and it becomes we almost think, oh my gosh, this is so obvious. How could we not have thought about it? And I think that's another great benefit of working with a co-author, is that you do talk about so much of this, as opposed to writing by yourself, where you're just going, page after page and maybe reading it and talking to beta readers. But because we really have a lot of discussions about the character and the backstory, and there have been times when we've actually gone back and completely changed a character, not a primary character usually, but a secondary character, or we've killed the character and then we have to apologize and say, sorry, you've got to go. But a lot of
Yeah, it sounds like your writing process is really dynamic. Are you planning to collaborate again? Oh, let me ask you something else. The strengths that you each have as authors, how do those complement each other in your partnership creating your works?
Sure. Fortunately, we do have different areas of strengths and weaknesses, or maybe we're just some enjoyment in different aspects. So, for instance, this is Lynne. I get a little bit, have a little more difficulty, I think, in doing descriptions of houses or rooms or closets, like Daphne's closet, where Valerie is terrific at that. So if I'm writing something, I'll just put, please add more here, and I'll email to Val, and she'll send it back to me. And then she likes to joke that I'm better at arguing than she is. So if we're having a scene where two people are having words, she may send it to me and say, can you ramp this up? And then I'll take it that way. So those are two areas where we do. And then I think also even if there's an area where we both feel relatively strong, it's two heads are always better than one. So we still edit each other's and add things, or if we're stuck in a scene where we're trying to show more emotion, then the other one can help with that. So we definitely go back and forth with all of our pages with each other, and our handprint is on each one, even if that's not the particular scene that we may have originally written.
And this is Valerie. There are times that I'll go back and read something, and even down to a sentence, one half of the sentence will be Lynne's and the other half will be mine. So we really do complement each other tremendously, I think.
I just love that. Your writing process is just so dynamic. I really like that. It sounds like you are planning to collaborate potentially again in the future. What can we fans look forward to?
Well, we're working on a book right now that, again, has two protagonists, very good friends who grew up with each other. But we also, in this book, hear from the killer. So a little bit different structure than The Last Mrs. Parrish, but we hope just as yummy and interesting and page-turning.
Yes.
All right, I'm already looking forward to it. How about you?
That sounds great.
How about you, Julie?
That sounds really great. Will that be first-person narrative, or how is that structured to hear the killer's mindset?
The killer's actually in second person.
Second person, okay.
Yeah, speaking to the victim and sort of in the killer's mind, and then the rest of it is in third person, filtered closely through each woman. But all third person.
Oh, great! That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, right. This one we tried about we tried it first person past, first person present, and just didn't quite fit. And so when we went and changed it to third person, that was the right point of view.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, I'm going to launch into my segment, which is I've called it Finding the Fire. And I talked briefly about P.D. James in one of our last episodes, how she wielded sharp intelligence, intricate plotting, combined with deep insights, and most importantly for a mystery novelist, detachment to produce some of the best British police procedurals ever written. Now I'm going to take the opposite tack and say that emotion, which Wendy spoke of earlier, is one of the most important characteristics a writer can use in crafting fiction. I attended a workshop this last fall with Donald Moss entitled The Emotional Craft of Fiction, and I'd like to share just a little of what I learned. I'm already seeing a big difference in my writing, but it's hard work to get at the underlying emotions and not go for the big ones, which often appear in fiction. I'm going to give you an example from my current work in progress. In World War I France, two main characters are on a battlefield and find a colleague dead. Their first emotions are big: horror, shock, repulsion, followed by the immediate second emotion, heartbreak. I dug deeper, and what emerged was the third level emotion: duty, loyalty, brotherhood, and their immediate need to cover up what actually happened to their friend. Another key learning: you can write about the bigger emotions, those powerful things like anger, passion, and rage. But the ones that have the most emotional impact on a reader are usually the secondary or the third emotions following the outburst. Things like shame, resentment, and guilt, while not as cymbal crashing as the big emotions, often have the resonance and depth that gives them a lasting power over the reader. As writers, I think that's what we all want, to create a story, a screenplay, or a poem that our readers experience and just can't forget. Don Moss said that what a reader wants most from fiction is the emotional experience, to go on the emotional journey and feel the feelings the character has, as well as getting a sense that the character mirrors the feelings the reader has. Writers must develop fiction not merely through the detached lens of a camera, but as the characters feel it themselves. Don's book, by the way, is called The Emotional Craft of Fiction: How to Write the Story Beneath the Surface. Don gives this final advice: stop worrying about plot and start embracing the emotional experience that will authentically connect you to your characters and your reader to you.
Thanks, Julie. There's definitely a lot of depth in what you're talking about, and I need to practice this so much more. I've been thinking about cold villains. They're cold, yet they're not devoid of emotion. Psychopaths and sociopaths are not devoid of emotion. In fact, they are emotional in specific ways that are challenging to show in writing. I've found in my research that contrary to what many of us believe, psychopaths and sociopaths' emotions are subtly expressed. Their emotions are calculated, and that can make them challenging characters to credibly write and keep the reader interested and engaged in their story. 4 traits that are often noted are extreme arrogance, manipulative, no remorse, and initially charming. One trait often noted as missing is empathy. Part of the skill in writing these characters is the degree the character displays each of these traits. Psychopaths have a range or degree of each of these traits. Also, these characters may not show all the traits to all characters they interact with. On top of that, they're lying and they're hiding things about themselves. Psychopaths are good liars. Rather than actually feeling emotions, these characters make themselves act in the way they feel they should in a particular situation to exhibit an emotion. See how it begins to get tricky on how to reveal the inner character of just such a character? And on top of all that, there are other traits besides just the 4 that I mentioned. This is a wealth of opportunity for talented authors and also a great challenge. And that's part of why it's also challenging for readers to recognize which characters in the plot are psychopaths and sociopaths. Just like real life, it's suggested that 1% to 4% of the population registers somewhere on the psychopathic scale. Now, normally in our episodes, the Podners and our guests recommend a story in some media, book, movie, TV, in addition to definitely recommending our guests' works. Today, I'm recommending a true crime mystery book and a drink to go with it. I was inspired to add a drink recommendation when I found out about the Double Cross Martini, which is, I love it. That's the popular drink in Bishop's Harbor in The Last Mrs. Parrish. The description, you're going to love this. Deliciously duplicitous, sneaks up on you, and packs a potent punch. But it's low carb, so you can still fit in your designer jeans. So I'm recommending the book The Stranger Beside Me by Ann Rule. This true serial murderer book by Ann Rule is about Ted Bundy, who murdered women in multiple states. Ann Rule met him and unknowingly became friends when they both volunteered at a phone crisis center in Seattle. Places like California, Texas, and New York have more serial killers than the Pacific Northwest, but the Pacific Northwest is higher per capita, a higher concentration geographically. Reasoning for this is ominous. Basically, it's because of easy access to so much wilderness that gives so many different places where bodies can be hidden. That gives me the chills, especially as an avid hiker. Given this story's specific connection to Seattle, I'm recommending a warm caramel frappe or latte to comfort while you read this disturbing but well-written true story. What's especially fascinating about this book is the psychopathological Ted Bundy and how well the author writes about him and describes him and his actions and the incredible deception. As Ann Rule said, she felt safe with him. Quote, and he would walk me to my car when my shift was over, and he would say, Ann, be sure your doors are locked. I don't want anything bad to happen to you on the way home. End of quote. Even after the crisis hotline work, they stayed friends. Anne Rule even had a teenage daughter who Ted Bundy was also friends with. Reading about that in the book is gripping. Women started disappearing in the area, and in an odd twist, Anne Rule had a book deal to write about the murders, not knowing that her friend was committing them. But eventually she started to see similarities and called police. Anne Rule said, quote, "I thought up to that point that I was really good at spotting killers, but nobody is," end of quote. This book is an autobiography, memoir, biography, and an incredible mystery behind finding this psychopathological personality, someone hiding in plain sight. Lynne, Val, I'm wondering, do you have recommendations for our listeners?
Yes, and that sounds good. I just wrote that down, and Anne's book sounds amazing.
Yes, I just ordered that one.
So my book that I'm recommending is called The War of Art: Break Through the Blocks and Win Your Inner Creative Battles, and it's written by Stephen Pressfield, and it's an amazing book for breaking through what he calls the resistance to whatever it is blocking your goals. So just quickly on the back, it says, do you dream about writing the great American novel? Regret not finishing your paintings, poems, or screenplays? Want to start a business or charity? Wish you could start dieting or exercising? Or hope to run a marathon? If you answered yes to any of these, then you need The War of Art. And it's true. It really is a very easy read, but it's profound, and a book that I picked up a long time ago, and I keep it next to my desk and for inspiration often.
Great. Well, this is Valerie, and my recommendation is an old classic that I recently reread. It's All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren. It's the story of Willie Stark, and loosely based on a real figure in our political history, Huey Long, governor of Louisiana. But it's the story of Stark and his dramatic political rise and fall in a deeply segregated South in the 1930s. Willie begins as just an ordinary man who looks around his state and he sees injustice and need and poverty, and he wants to fix things. So he runs for political office, and eventually he becomes governor. But by then, he is willing to do anything to make things change and to make that change happen fast. And that's when the reader begins to see the depths that people will sink to in order to make those kinds of changes. The dirty politics and the backroom deals. The corruption of the politicians in this book isn't glamorized or sensationalized, but it really does show the dark side behind the innocent-looking school, hospital, or office complex. So we really see firsthand how those deals can make someone rich and powerful, or how they can destroy a reputation. One reviewer wrote, "It is Shakespeare, the Bible, and the moral to every story you have ever heard, all rolled into one." So I think the drink that you would probably have as you're reading this is, first you would sit in your leather swivel chair and put your feet up on the desk and be holding in your hand a bourbon on the rocks.
Oh, yeah. Oh, excellent. Cheers.
Very good. And so timely for the time of the politics that we're living in now, certainly.
It is.
It is indeed. Well, my recommendation this time is for a short documentary film produced and featuring a favorite actor of mine, Tom Hanks. It's called California Typewriter, and it's centered on typewriters and the people who collect and use them, highlighting a devoted, small family-owned business in Oakland, California called, you guessed it, California Typewriter. It's about a struggling multi-generational family and enterprise which repairs and sources all kinds of typewriters. You might think that sounds dull, even dry, but it's not. Now, I didn't recognize or realize that Tom Hanks was a big-time collector of typewriters, and in fact, he still writes on them every day in his office, which you get to see here in the documentary. The film follows several other obsessed collectors of this early technology around the country and even interviews famed writers who still use this device to write, including two-time Pulitzer Prize winner David McCullough. And I think the drink I'd have to select to go along with these typewriters, vintage or not, would be probably something, I think, from the 20s, like the Singapore Sling. Now, the scene that tickled me the most was of a 20-something man walking into a university library, pulling out his backpack, unpacking his typewriter, and typing away, to the utter befuddlement and consternation of his millennial cohorts, some of whom were filming him on their phones. Typewriters are enjoying something of a retro renaissance. Who knew? This humble little film has won or been nominated for several awards. And unlike several prior mystery thriller films I've reviewed here for the show, this one is completely PG. I hope you enjoy it. We'd like to thank Lynne and Valerie Constantine, writing as Liv Constantine, for sharing their wonderful book, The Last Mrs. Parrish, with us. This puts the crowning touch on our last podcast for 2017. Wendy and I are wishing you a healthy, happy, and very successful new year. And looking forward to January, we'll be joining writer J.A. Jantz and talking about more mysteries. Thanks again. Keep reading and keep writing.
Thank you so much.